So tonight we're going to talk about who the heck do we go to see if we need a kid to get feeding therapy. As a parent, how would I even know where to start? I know when I had my own picky eater and I expressed my frustration to my pediatrician back in the day, he was like, all kids are picky, the sugar out of it. And I think unless it's that really extreme picky eating where it's obvious that the child's weight is faltering, they're maybe only eating 2 or 3 foods, and the big issue is always the growth curve, that a lot of times those kids do get referred. But why are we waiting till then? These kids need to get referred sooner. So the parents listening, if you've got a picky eater and you're wondering, how do I get help before this gets to be the extreme picky eater and the more challenging situation for our entire family? Here's what I want you to know. First of all, tonight I have gone old school on all of you because I made this little, look at me, I'm all crafty. Now I got to figure out how to put it in the screen here for you. Let's see. Let's scoot over. There we go. There we go. Okay. Got all crafty here tonight because I want to show you something. This is actually just a printout of a slide that I use in a lot of my presentations to kind of explain what I call the Olympic rings of feeding therapy. All right. So take a look here. We've got the medical aspect that we have to consider with these kids. Even the garden variety picky eater can often be a picky eater because they're challenged by constipation, or maybe they have some gut issues. Maybe it's something that really could lead to serious issues like eosinophilic esophagitis or gastroesophageal reflux disease that's causing a lot of irritation, et cetera, et cetera. We could list so many. Well, that's the medical aspect. That's where the pediatrician comes in. The pediatrician is the first line of defense when it comes to kids being picky eaters. And he or she is going to be the one who knows where to refer. But let me give you some guidelines. Will they refer to an SLP like myself, a speech language pathologist, or will they refer to an occupational therapist? Well, if you look right here, SLPs and OTs, their forte is developing skill and ability for eating. Skill and ability. We do a lot of things, and OTs are amazing at how much they can do. They especially focus on the sensory system. And speech pathologists, we have a really thorough understanding of the mouth, the whole GI system, really, because all the way down through respiration when you think about it. And we do learn quite a bit about gut health if we're taking our feeding courses, as do the OTs. So you can see where there's some crossover there, right? All right. But gosh, what about our wonderful RDs? So often we've got these fabulous registered dietitians, nutritionists, who are writing excellent articles about picky eating, and they will often follow what we call the division of responsibility, which was a model that was originally developed by Ellen Satter. And if you ever see my bookshelf behind me, I've got a lot of books of her books on my bookshelf. But what an SLP or an OT would do is they would help that child build the skill so that the division of responsibility works easily for them. The medical issue could be, like I said, the pediatrician, but it also might be a gastroenterologist, an otolaryngologist or ENT. It might even be a dentist. There are a lot of medical issues that can come into feeding. Let's go down to the bottom of our Olympic rings here. Let's talk about caregivers. What about the parents? What about the daycare workers? What about grandma and grandpa? You know, that family circle that supports that child always has an influence on their feeding skills because they're the ones who are going to follow through with the home program that's set by these professionals. And they're also the ones that are doing the parenting. And parents, it's never, ever, ever the parents' fault. It's just that parents are part of the process, so they're part of the solution. So caregivers also are part of this team. And of course, the child themselves are always the captain of the ship. They kind of lead us through this journey. And so if you look right here, it says internal motivation. That's their forte. That's what we're trying to help them develop, is that internal motivation to want to try new foods on their own, because it will never ever work to make a child eat. Never works to make a child eat. Instead, what we want to do is use specific tools and strategies to help a child believe they can eat, to help a child build skill and ability, to have confidence in eating, to help a child have resolve medical issues that get in the way of eating, to help a child have a better feeding relationship with their parents. But all of that comes down to eventually internal motivation. And then finally, this is a recent hot topic on some of the Facebook groups. What about board certified behavior analysts? In my mind, because I'm trained in ABA, and in all of my courses, I teach some very specific strategies that are rooted in applied behavior analysis. In my mind, their primary role is to analyze. They are fabulous at taking data and analyzing what's cueing the behavior and what's reinforcing the behavior, and what sort of behaviors do we want to shape to help that child be a healthy, happy eater. So who do you go to? Depends on the issue. Therein lies the problem. Is a pediatrician, they're awesome, but they're not feeding specialists, so they don't always know what the issue is behind the picky to extreme picky eating. If they can refer to a team evaluation, in my mind, that's ideal, because you'll get everyone's input and everyone's eyes on that child, and we'll come to probably a solution because of that team approach, hopefully sooner than later. But the reality is, for many of us working in early intervention or doing private therapy, we are in a hospital setting where we are a part of this team. I used to be part of a team like this when I worked at the hospital. But now, if I want to communicate with an OT or a board certified behavior analyst, et cetera, it means trying to track them down on the phone and maybe an email. It takes time. It's not easy. But for our kids who are extreme picky eaters, this model especially is ideal. Let's say this just isn't possible. You live in a rural area, this isn't going to happen. In that case, you want to find the person who's most experienced in feeding. Occasionally, that might be a BCBA who specializes and only treats children in feeding issues. But before you guys get all up in arms, bear with me for a second, because I know this is a hot topic. Please keep in mind that each one of these circles, these Olympic rings, overlaps. So although the core of what they're doing is analyzing, they absolutely could have received extra education in oral motor, skill and ability. They could have received extra education in nutrition, but that doesn't mean that's within their scope of practice to address. There's nothing wrong with getting extra education. I do it all the time in terms of nutrition, but I'm not a registered dietitian. The thing is, I do it because I want to make sure that I know what I don't know, right? And that I know I can find the red flags that I can screen for when I might need to refer a child over to an RD if I don't have this team in front of me. Okay, let's keep going. So it might be a BCBA who specializes in feeding, who also knows how to stay within their scope of practice and is working closely and keeping in contact with the rest of the team, and knows enough to screen and realize that, hey, I think this is actually an oral motor issue. I need to contact my SLP and OT buddies and see if they can't collaborate with me to help this child. That's a good BCBA. Let's take the opposite end of that. Let's say that it's me, an SLP. Now listen, guys, I know a lot about sensory integration, but I am not an occupational therapist. So I know enough that if I think that child's having trouble with motor planning or sensory difficulties overall, I'm going to refer that kid to an OT for occupational therapy. If that OT doesn't specialize in feeding, we're going to work together. If the OT does specialize in feeding, I might just have the OT work with that child and just pop in every once in a while. Totally okay, as long as it's okay with the family. But the last thing we want to do is have a child go to 3 or 4 different therapies when certain people are trained. It's more a matter of knowing where your scope of practice is, following those ethical guidelines, and knowing when to contact other people to support that child. So for parents, if your pediatrician isn't sure, let me give you a couple ideas. I'm going to set this down for a second. Okay, let me give you a couple ideas. From birth to 3 in the United States, we have what's called early intervention. All you have to do is call your local school district and let them know you have concerns about your child's feeding development, because feeding is developmental, just like learning to walk, okay? Well, what you're going to do is call your local school district, ask for an assessment for feeding. The child will probably get more of a global assessment where they'll look at gross motor skills, fine motor skills, speech and feeding development, et cetera, hearing, wonderful, well-rounded whole child assessment. And that's important, because actually all of those things can come into play when it comes to feeding. But then the issue is going to be which professional is going to treat that child. The most important thing for the parents listening is to ask for someone who's experienced. Ask for someone who's experienced. No offense to the new therapists who are starting out. I mean, that's great, but they're being mentored, they're being supervised. So if you have someone who's experienced, they may bring in a student or two to help train. That's fine. But I would always ask, when it comes to feeding therapy, for an experienced clinician. I just think ethically that's the best advice I can give you. Let's say that you don't like that person, okay? Let's say you don't like the techniques or the strategies that they're doing with your child. It doesn't feel comfortable to you. It doesn't feel like the right fit. Maybe it's working, but it isn't right in your heart. Absolutely, 110%. Speak up to that person's supervisor and ask for a different therapist, and be very specific why. Don't stay in a situation that doesn't feel good in your heart. Listen to that parent's intuition. All of us have it. You know if something's not right. That being said, give it 3 or 4 sessions and talk and communicate to your therapist. Let them know what feels right in your heart with your family and what fits into your family dynamics, because some families like a little bit more of a black and white, what I consider an ABA type approach. It isn't forceful, but it's very structured. It's very systematic. Other families I work with need more of a let's play in food and let's cook together and let's experience this with all of our senses. My personal favorite is a blend of the two, So I hope that gives you some idea of who to ask for when you think your child needs feeding therapy.